Utopian Scholastic is an aesthetic that was popular in the education field from the late 1980s to early 2000s. It consists of stock image collage, early CGI, references to academia, references to surrealism, and serifed fonts. The random nature of Utopian Scholastic sparked a certain curiosity that made children more likely to engage with educational content, and companies like DK Eyewitness and Microsoft Encarta experienced great success due to the aesthetic. The history of Utopian Scholastic is somewhat related to that of the Consumer Aesthetics Research Institute, which we will detail shortly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. It's just this kind of aesthetic that you put together slowly over time. That it's like, oh, this is what every textbook seemed to have on its cover, and any kind of like instructionally minded CD-ROM wrapper.
Yeah,
basically. It's
pretty easily recognizable. We put together a Pinterest board. And if you look at that, it's going to instantly click for you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This feels like it must have been, I don't know, as Kari, set up about kind of exploring every aesthetic. I feel like this must have been encountered semi-early or what?
Actually, it was a bit later, and it wasn't an aesthetic that was directly identified by a Kari member. So the way it happened was, Evan Collins created the Y2K aesthetic group, and then there was McBling. Mm-hmm. And then I think there were a few others. But people started to get inspired by this phenomenon that was happening of people creating Facebook groups around aesthetics. And so someone in a couple of them, their name was Suze Holt, they were in the Global Village Coffee House Facebook group. Oh. And in 2017 or 2018, someone named Carl Kraft made a post with some early examples of Utopian Scholastic, and she got inspired. So then she created this Facebook group called Utopian Scholastic Designs for a Pre-9/11 World. And so that's how that happened. And I was in conversation with Evan this week because I wanted to clarify, is Suze Holt, an official Kari member? Yeah. And no. So it's kind of this like in-between space where it's interesting. And it just goes to show like how Facebook was kind of a creative space for this thing back in the day.
Yeah, no. This is from around like 2018 or so?
2017 or 2018. Like I'm going to attach screenshots in the show notes that are of these posts, and they happened 7 years ago. I don't know. I can't do the mental math.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
It's so cool that I don't know. These are like original screenshots by you of how this stuff came about.
Well, Evan did them for me, but it actually turned out that I could join the group too. Oh. Because unlike the other Kari aesthetic Facebook groups, this one was not archived because none of the Kari members were in charge of it. They weren't the mods. So this one's still active. There's about 40,000 people. Wow. And you can join it and look at it. Although, honestly, most of the posts aren't really bangers. Particularly the new ones. Like, I would rather look at, like, say, the Kari page on Utopian Scholastic or the Aesthetics Wiki page. Those are better resources.
Yeah, Kari is always more tightly curated. There's, like, not a lot of edge cases on there. They just have the, like, platonic ideals.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Aesthetics Wiki, I think they have the numbers game, but I don't know. Sometimes not everything's perfect on there.
Yeah. It's good to have any resources on this because today's episode is going to be the first deep dive on Utopian Scholastic, sort of like how our Whimsicraft episode was. Like, this is probably going to be about an hour, and that's the longest anyone's ever thought about this.
Hey, we're always happy to blaze the way here on SG. But
yeah.
This screenshot of the kind of origin of it's always very democratic on these Facebook pages of how they're kind of arriving at the name. But one of these comments really struck me. This person says, honestly, it makes me emotional to remember this era of strange optimism. And it's like, it's not so strange for the period. They were in a very long, this was the 90s. Like, you had a continual 10 years of economic growth, like economic expansion. There was a lot of reasons to be broadly optimistic.
Yeah, I think that boomers and Gen X people prior to the 90s, they experienced a sort of accumulation of nihilism that we talked about on the millennial nihilism episode. Although they weren't millennials, but, there was each successive generation got a bit more pessimistic. Yeah. But then around the 90s, it just feels like there was this respite where everyone was a bit more utopian. And there's this article I read many years ago that talked about how the internet as cyberspace, it expanded people's optimism because it expanded the physical limitations of the world for the first time since, say, the end of the Age of Exploration or whatever.
Wow. Yeah, I think we'll kind of be touching on that a bit throughout this, of just the very early stages of the internet. We just didn't know what form it was going to take. Why wouldn't we assume the kind of the better angels of the internet, the highest minded use of it?
Yeah, people thought it was going to be more for education than it ended up being, which we'll get to in a moment. But first we can talk about, why did it first emerge in relation to the echo boom?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I feel like I heard this phrase like once before, but this is basically the baby boomers having kids. So us.
Yeah. So it was a youth bulge of sorts. There was an increase in like the total number of babies being born in the country. And so a lot of educational institutions, they either expanded or remodeled during this time. And then any company that had a stake in the education field did really well. So like DK Eyewitness, like Scholastic, they grew a lot during this time period.
Yeah. No, I was trying to find the numbers on it, specifically for, I don't know, the built environment in this stage. Like, I mean, libraries, they're always going to be built,
Yeah.
And it's hard to track like, what places opened up and expanded children's wing in this time. But specifically with children's museums, in 1975, there were only 38. And then 80 of them opened between 1976 and 1990, and 130 opened between 1990 and 2007. So that's a pretty big expansion of something. It's like basically a whole new market. Yeah, because that would outpace any population growth in that period, I think.
Yeah, and now there's actually 500 children's museums, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But I mean, part of that could just be that, well, the wealthy, they've always, whenever they've had money and wanted to engage in philanthropic efforts, it's pretty much always education or the arts. Yeah. So like, this is children's education. They're going to be more likely to put their money towards it.
Also, it feels like in any decently built up urban area, there's already going to be a natural history museum and a great art museum. And like they kind of missed the Gilded era, when all this stuff was like built. And so it's like, oh, we didn't have kids museums, so now I can maybe stick my name on this. Why pay for like a wing on a museum when you could pay for the whole construction of a children's museum? If you're rich in the 90s.
And what this could have reflected a bit of too was around this time, it's when children's spaces started to become even more so segregated.
Yeah.
Children before the 70s were more integrated in society. And then, all the news about serial killers and other things, parents started to cordon their children off.
Yeah. I was trying to find more about the like early history of children's museums, and it's one of those things where like, yeah, technically like there was an early period in the 1910s and 30s, but really it's this like 80s and 90s model of children's museums that we also kind of export out to Europe as well. They had no real tradition of this. And it feels like a very American model of it. It's this bifurcated thing of like there are spaces for kids and there are spaces for adults. I think previously Europeans would have just expected like, yeah, you bring your kids to the Louvre and they deal. They're going to have a good time.
Have you ever been to the Chicago Children's Museum?
Is it? Oh, it's at Navy Pier.
It's at Navy Pier. It's across from where the IMAX used to be. I went there several times as a kid and would act out. And
I would become ungovernable in the children's museum.
I don't think listeners know this, but I kind of had the opposite personality as a kid where I would scream and get in trouble. And I almost got kicked out of the Children's Museum once with my sister.
Oh my! I mean, I would get in trouble and stuff, but it was more for like reading books in class and that kind of stuff. I was just more kind of like blasé and in trouble than like lightly hyperactive. But come on,
yeah.
But no, that's funny. No, Las Vegas had a very robust and very new children's museum that I fondly remember.
Yeah. So another reason why this aesthetic emerged during this time is that people thought that the internet was sort of intrinsically educational. Phrases like the World Wide Web and the information superhighway, they reflected people's utopian beliefs that the internet was going to make the world a more educated and connected place.
Yeah. Superhighway. We don't even use that for anything else. Like it's never used in actual like, oh yeah, there's a highway and there's a superhighway. Like that giant was the Katy bridge or whatever in Dallas, like the widest highway in America. Like no one calls that a super highway, I don't think.
Is that the one that's called Spaghetti Junction?
No, this one is like just straight but ugly. It's not like that crazy. In Las Vegas, we had the Spaghetti Bowl. That's what people called this one, highway interchange, which I always thought was fun.
When I think superhighway, that makes me start to think of a highway that's like 100 feet in the air.
yeah, very, very high off the ground. Yeah, I wonder also the other part of that, information. I wonder if a bit of this is like a kind of misunderstanding of the word information. Like the internet is, yes, an information superhighway. It's transmitting lots of information from computer to computer. But I think that people view that like too charitably, where they're like, oh yes, information, and they're picturing like physical, like the Magna Carta being sent across stuff. But no, it's just ones and zeros. Like it can be in any form. Like it feels like I'm maybe retroactively looking at this, but like seeing how entertainment focused the internet is nowadays, like this just seems so jarring to think that everyone's going to use it to become the next Plato and stuff.
Yeah, no, people had no idea that the internet was going to replace TV and be even worse than TV. Like, now it takes actually an attention span in order to complete a program without stopping to look at your phone.
Yeah. Have you heard that thing about how like Netflix execs are like instructing writers' rooms they want characters to say what they're doing out loud more so that people can stay on their phones and not miss stuff? Yeah, they're like trying to write out scenes where it's just like unspoken things happen.
I mean, that kind of helps me because I actually am often doing physical therapy when I watch TV. Oh. And foreign language programs, I love them, but I can't watch those when I'm doing physical therapy. So yeah, being able to look away from the screen does inform what I choose to watch.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's when I watch, like, I don't know, I do have some background TV. I'm not innocent, but mostly like reruns of Top Gear.
Yeah. But yeah, some of the best examples of Utopian Scholastic are what are called interactive encyclopedias. Mm-hmm. I learned about them for the first time this week. Microsoft Encarta is probably the biggest one, but there are others like the Oxford Interactive Encyclopedia. I was with Kanan this morning, our friend. We had breakfast. I had pancakes. But I brought up this episode, and he said that he used Microsoft Encarta in school as a kid. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have no memory of this. And it was like, I think they released it from like the early 90s up until like 2009 or so when they just rolled it into other products. But yeah, I mean, I was saying earlier, like two very good examples of this are just like anything CD-ROM related and anything like high school textbook. Yeah. And so this thing being a CD-ROM textbook is like the perfect mix. And the fact that it was, updated every year means that we have all of these like different years you can look at, or they try to come up with some new fun way to put like a Ferris wheel next to a like I don't know, a dolphin jumping out of the water and stuff.
Yeah, like Encarta 95 is probably the best box art that was released.
This is the unwrapping face one.
Yeah, it has Nelson Mandela and Mother Teresa on it. Yeah. There's clouds in the background, but it's a really great example. But pretty much from 95 to 99, they're all good.
Yeah, the high point.
Yeah, but yeah, this makes me remember though that there was a time when computers and the internet weren't, for entertainment and weren't necessarily fun because, the classroom computer that was in the classrooms when I grew up as a kid, if I had time to go on it, it wasn't actually really that interesting. There was a few software programs. I could open up a few software programs, but the most interesting thing to do is Microsoft Paint. And my teacher knew it was too fun, so she told us not to use it.
What? But Microsoft Paint is innocent. It's so creative.
Yeah, but I mean other games or things on the desktop, like say the Oregon Trail or Math Blaster, there was actual information that could be used for a standardized test, I guess. Whereas Microsoft Paint was just like playing around with colors.
Yeah. How about pinball?
Pinball? I don't remember that being on the desktop.
I had to track it down, but it was in there. I remember in elementary school we had like one computer in our class. And it was very distracting because it had a screensaver. Sometimes it was the pipe maze, but I remember the first person walking through a maze thing. And that just distracted the hell out of kids. Kids will do anything but watch class. And the teacher didn't know how to turn off the screensaver either because it was like, boomer teacher.
Yeah.
So she made this like construction paper privacy cover that would like a veil to go over the computer when not in use.
Yeah. I don't remember my like classroom screensaver, but my dad had one which would just be like this energy ball that would like go around from edge to edge.
I can picture that. I think that was in Vista. I think that was a standard one in the oft maligned Microsoft Vista.
Yeah. And then another interesting thing that was a factor in this aesthetic coming together was that sort of traditional and digital mediums were on par with each other in this way that was really interesting. So traditional mediums like painting and illustration, there were still a plethora of people who knew how to work in them. And then for digital mediums like digital stock collage, which we'll get into in a bit, there weren't that many people. So oftentimes as someone who is like putting together an ad, it might make more sense to have someone like illustrate or paint it as opposed to doing it digitally. So there'd often be an interesting mix of both.
I never thought of it in that way. I don't know, I've always thought about people who do like dinosaur illustrations. Like, what is that world like? You know, like there must have been a huge demand for them at some point, and then like you either have to like adapt or die. Kind of like the dinosaurs. Come to think of it, you gotta adapt or die.
Yeah, scientific illustration is actually one of the only reference points I can point to provide evidence, because the Field Museum, which is the city's natural history museum, it used to have 6 full-time scientific illustrators who would create illustrations for the research staff, because the Field Museum, it's both a public museum but also a research collection. So there's full-time scientists who work there. And now there's only one scientific illustrator. It's the Field Museum's artist in residence. It's Peggy McNamara. And she's had that job since 1990, which kind of shows, you know, when the need for scientific illustrators probably disappeared, because her body of work, it's not particularly accurate. That's not the goal. Like, she depicts all of the subjects that she draws in this kind of sort of semi-holographic way. Like, they have this sheen to them.
Oh, I read it as kind of like impressionistic. Like, she does a lot of watercolor stuff.
Yeah.
What it kind of reminded me of is like, what I'm about to say is not true, but many people think it is. It's that when photography was invented and we had, you know, like accurate depictions of things, then we no longer needed to paint accurately. And this is what caused abstract and modern art. This is not true. That is like, look up the origins of modern art. Like, it has to do with Japan and like all these like foreign influences on the European art market and changing tastes and all that stuff. But it feels like it was actually true here. Like, if we could just more accurately represent things with like digital art and 3D and cross sections and all of that, then the focus becomes like, all right, who's the coolest watercolor artist we can get for this that's going to really bring these things to life, not in an accuracy way, but in like a bringing feelings way.
Yeah, because I think that scientific illustration is the perfect candidate to get replaced by digital photography, which is easier to work in than, say, analog photography. So scientists in the field could just take a digital photograph. And after a certain point, the need, again, it just evaporated by the 90s when Peggy McNamara took this position. So Utopian Scholastic, it gets described as being sort of the kids' version of Frasurbane. Evan Collins, he says that it's sort of the base layer, and then all of the other elements we're going to talk about in a moment get added on top.
Yeah, Frasurbane is a little bit of a fascination of mine. Because I'm a fan of the show Frasier, basically. So yeah, the term for that comes from the show Frasier, because Frasier has this amazing high-rise condo in Seattle that he has done up in the coolest, you know, most modern contemporary style of its time. And the urbane comes from the kind of like city educated, kind of aging yuppie kind of sense.
Yeah, for me, I actually didn't know much about this aesthetic. I think you're still more of an expert on it than I am. But it has this sort of timeless quality that's emphasized, where it's sort of meant to look like it could be, well, not 100 years old, but again, it's sort of like, when was this made? And the answer is the 90s now, but at the time it looked kind of ageless. Yeah,
it was taking these elements of the kind of like Memphis school, like bright, rounded, plasticine, geometric 80s style, and then just turning it into warm tones, natural materials, and then also taking a kind of postmodern like love for columns and for like traditional architecture forms, but in a kind of like abstracted way. And this happens every so often. People take a traditional thing and they like simplify it. This happened a lot in the Great Depression. A lot of federal buildings were built in a like stripped classicism way, because it's just cheaper to do less detailing and to do just a squared off column versus like a fluted, you know, rounded one. But yeah, it's just like a grown up version of that. Like, the brash 80s had faded, and now it was time for a more dignified, buttoned up.
It's sort of like maybe what we've talked about, where trends get absorbed into the larger culture. And in this case, you could see it getting absorbed over time, getting more muted and becoming more mainstream.
Yeah. And I guess I'm a little more focused on the like interior design aspect of Frasurbane, but there's a big like graphic design presence of this. You see it in like adult contemporary album covers and stuff, or like menus sometimes, a lot of just like commercial ephemera. But yeah, it would use a lot of like natural materials. You'd see like a thing of hay or something in it. Like, it would want that naturalness.
Yeah, because there are a lot of examples of Frasurbane buildings and interiors in this way that you said. you thought wasn't really the case with Utopian Scholastic. But that's because the Pinterest board, I didn't emphasize the like children's museums, gift shops that are very common on Evan Collins' Arena page.
Yeah, no, there is a big like in-person thing to Utopian Scholastic. I didn't really realize it, but it's like in this period, there's so many different currents happening in the 90s. I think another one that's kind of a part of this in regards to museums is that this was the heyday of themed entertainment. Themed restaurants and all that. And I think that there's a point when things jump from themed entertainment to Utopian Scholastic. Like I saw this one gift shop. This was the Explore More store. So they had like an Aztec area, and then they had like a Prospector, abandoned mine area. And so that to me just seems like theming, you know. But then you posted this really good example of the Audubon Marketplace, the New Orleans Zoo. And this is, it's real. They brought the high school textbook to life. It's a Corinthian column holding up like a more stripped neoclassical or postmodern arch. And then it's set on this plinth of zebra print.
Yeah.
Like this is literally like you can just picture like the zebra jumping out of the like Arc de Triomphe type stuff.
Yeah, it's the best example. I really love that one.
There is, I would say, the one kind of like Utopian Scholastic bit of Frasurbane is the pairing of very like modern furnishings, like modern furniture or like a cabinet built in, but then you stock it with like African arts and statuary. Like you do that juxtaposition. You can literally see this in Fraser's apartment. He has this like kind of blonde oak, very like clean and minimal bookcase that has like all types of like African fertility statues and stuff. It was a way to show that you were urbane and like well studied. One of the like, in an episode, I forget what this is, but Frasier does refer to his apartment as like, it's eclectic. And that's like, it is what it is. Like, yeah, it is all this stuff like pulled together.
Yeah. I keep forgetting to look this up, but I feel like National Geographic, it goes through phases where it's in vogue. And I feel like the 90s, it probably was, because I know my family did have National Geographic in our household in the 90s.
Yeah, I was once in a hospital waiting room that had National Geographics from the 90s.
Really?
Like, yeah, they just had, this was around like 2014 or something, but I was like, wow, damn.
I feel like people would have collaged them by now.
Yeah, you'd think they'd chop them up. It's great that we can like see these examples of like whoever decided to take a photo of a recently renovated museum gift shop, like thank you, you know? Because Frasurbane is hard to capture. I think you have to like look at old magazines about interior design because people's home interiors just get turned over pretty quickly. And also they're private, so not everyone is photographed and shown off. But these public facing like museums and stuff are such a good example of this. And I think a lot of times they're like still sticking around. Like if you go to the Field Museum, they have the Africa Hall. And that is, they just celebrated its 30th anniversary, meaning they haven't updated it in 30 years. Like it is from 1993. And it really looks it. It has actually kind of like a African Memphis style. Like it's got super geometric blocky. There's some squiggles in there too. People love a good Memphis squiggle.
Yeah. But that's not even the oldest section because in the basement, there's actually a insect exhibit from the 60s.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it's very minimal. It's by the men's bathroom, I believe. But yeah, that's the oldest, and there's no plans to update it currently.
If it ain't broke, if we haven't... I think it's like with bugs and stuff, it's like, well, there's nothing racist about this, so we don't need to like update it and change it, because they had to update and change their like Inuit exhibit.
Oh, yeah. Now I think we can kind of get into the elements of Utopian Scholastic. So Frasurbane is the base. You have that sort of vibe going on, and then there are all these other things layered onto it, specifically for children. So the big one, it's stock image collage. And within like Evan Collins' Arena page on Utopian Scholastic, he says stock photography collage. This is because I looked this up. So according to Google Trends around 2012, the term stock photography got replaced by stock image. So it's just easier to say.
Yeah. I guess so. It's just hard to imagine a time before stock imagery. I thought it was all right. Like I imagine Getty Images has been around since like time immemorial.
Yeah, no, I know that it has been around. Like I remember learning about Alfredo Jar's work. He's a contemporary artist, and one of his pieces talks about stock image photography in the 70s. So it's been around for longer than that. But maybe it's just that you were able to access it digitally, and then you could access, stock image websites and then download them and then collage them using this brand new editing design software. And that's how this stock image collage element came to be.
Wow. Yeah. The photos are often so good.
Yeah.
I think they're really like clear and high quality. I can just picture like an elephant, You know, you'd see like an elephant storming towards the camera. Like that's the kind of like typical imagery I'd see being used on this.
Yeah, they have like a sort of National Geographic quality to them. And I think the term for it is flat lighting. You know, they don't want any shadows.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting because this still would have been like the heyday of film photography too, but we now had digital collaging. So it's like a digital collage made of things taken with just a very nice film camera.
Yeah.
So you still get that kind of grain off of it, I think.
I was once told that I think one of the Olympic Games was the turning point where digital started to take over film photography. There was something, I forget which one, but it was probably one of the early ones in the 2000s.
Wow.
And then the next element is like the juxtaposition of multiple academic disciplines. You know, like why would you see a picture with the Pope, a parrot, and King Tut? And then why would you see a butterfly next to George Washington and a fern? You know, the random nature of all of these things put side by side, they spark a certain curiosity that these education-focused companies were hoping would lead consumers to then, you know, buy their product and then like figure out what was going on.
It kind of reminds me of the was the Voyager probe that we sent off like into far space, you know, and it had these golden records on it that was supposed to show like all of human accomplishments. So we had like Beethoven's Fifth on it and like the sounds of like a baby crying and like all these like very human things. And this feels like a similar thing of how do you encapsulate like civilization, I would say broadly, like all of it. And so sometimes it's just an interesting arrangement because they'll have like, if you do look at it from a man-made achievements thing, like just looking at one image, you have the International Space Station, you have the Hagia Sophia, you have the Astrolabe, and you have a 2001 Porsche 911 sports car. Like it just feels like it's being put like in the tradition of these things. And maybe that was a very good year for the Porsche 911. I don't know.
But was it really called Porsche 911?
Yeah, and they didn't stop.
What?
After 9/11. That's how good the car was. Yeah. And no one ever called the 911 or something. Maybe the British do or something. But yeah, it was always called the 911.
Yeah.
Yeah, they refused to back down
Wow.
after that.
Well, you know, a physical space I can think of that evokes this sort of randomness where you step into it and you're like, wow, look at our achievements is the Stanley Hall at the Field Museum. That's the main space you enter into. I would refer to it as a lobby before this episode, but it's where you'd see like Sue the T-Rex back in the day before she got moved. And now there's a Titanosaur, but the things there that they kind of like alternate what's there over time. But at the moment, you can see African elephants, the Titanosaur, a pterosaur, and two enormous totem poles. But the randomness, it has that sort of, it evokes the same thing.
Yeah, if it was just the like animals and skeletons and that kind of stuff, you'd be like, oh, Natural History Museum, like, yeah, whatever. But adding the totem poles to it is just like, this is a cathedral to the concept of learning and like human thought and all this stuff. But,
yeah, they're the tallest things in the space. They're huge.
No, yeah. I love the Titanosaur. That's such a good, like, if you're going to take away Sue, you better put something good there. And so a giant Italian Titanosaur is amazing.
Yeah. I learned a lot about T-Rex fossils, actually, because I watched an episode of DK Eyewitness for this week. Oh, yeah. But I'll get to that later.
No.
So another element they had was early CGI, and it was really at its infancy during this time. Like Toy Story was the best CGI that had ever come out. And it oftentimes kind of does look a little awkward. It can be charming, but it kind of does detract from the images a little bit.
Yeah, you can tell they like, there's some that are mixed where they have like photo like collage and then also some 3D elements, but it's best when they're kept to basics.
Yeah.
Like it will just have like a sphere and like a cone, like it'll have like pure geometric forms, like the easiest thing to do in early CGI.
Yeah. It's interesting what they would choose to be the CGI object in a stock image collage. Like, so oftentimes it would be a globe for some reason.
Oh yeah, that's a pretty easy one. Yeah, no polygons to do there, just like literally wrapping an image around.
Oh yeah, spheres are easy, right?
Yeah, easiest thing. Oftentimes a test that in early CGI technology they do is the teacup. They would use just like a standard teacup because it casts a shadow on itself, which is very useful. Yeah, and it has round and flat elements.
You know what they use to teach Blender now? It's donuts. There's a very famous donut tutorial.
Oh,
millions of people have done it.
Wow. Does it have sprinkles?
Yeah, they teach you how to add like textures with sprinkles. I've never done that personally.
Do you form the donut by like doing a revolve? Do you make like a circle and then revolve it to make a...
I've never done that tutorial. I mostly work in the sculpting workspace. I've never gotten that far with Blender, but yeah.
Interesting.
And then also there are some examples of Utopian Scholastic that are purely CGI. Like there's this really cool computer game that I found. It's called Weird, Truth is Stranger Than Fiction. It's a computer game from 1996. And you can look at what the gameplay was like on YouTube. It seems really interesting, but it was like this exploration of a multimedia encyclopedia of strange phenomena. And, you know, they show you things like sea serpents and yeah, it's kind of cool. But yeah, the examples, it's like, it matches. I can see how it fits, but it doesn't really quite do it for me.
It feels like it forms more the like building blocks of vaporwave stuff later. Like this feels like it's its own thing. but these kind of like purely CGI worlds would just, you know, become vaporwave someday. Yeah.
Yeah, it reads just as aesthetic.
Yeah. It reminds me of the video game Myst, MYST. Do you know that?
I've never played
So it was like a point and click mystery game, but it was entirely like 3D rendered environments, but they were still images of 3D environments basically. So like their little computers would like run these renderings to get these nice 3D worlds, but then you could run it on anything. It's essentially like a PowerPoint presentation. Yeah. But yeah, a very successful game.
That's kind of like what Weird Truth is Stranger Than Fiction was like, because you would go around this environment and then you'd kind of click to zoom in a bit and look closer, and then you could click on it and then read text. But yeah, it was like that.
It's a little bit of like smoke and mirrors. Like we were obviously yearning for a 3D interactive world, but like we were just not there yet in technology. So you just kind of trick someone.
People wanted to be though, really bad. And then the next element we can talk about is surrealism and romanticism. So listeners who don't know as much about art, do you want to talk about what surrealism is?
I don't know. I think you can do it better than me. Now you got me wondering if I don't know enough about art.
Yeah. Well, there is a really good Rene Magritte exhibit at the Art Institute. And I think his work is the most similar in the sense that like the way that objects are arranged within these stock image collages, it's very similar to the way that Rene Magritte would place objects sort of in the middle of things or just in relation to each other and then paint them in this really flat way. Like he did the painting where it's of the man with the apple in front of his face.
Oh, yeah.
My favorite one by him is this one where it's of a sunset, but the sun is in front of trees. Oh, yeah. I love that one.
Playing with like perspective and like doing these like incorrect things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Utopian Scholastic compositions can vary a bit. Some of them seem to really take place nowhere. Like they have no sense of gravity to them. Some of them feel like explosions, like a supernova coming forth from a single point. But other ones, a lot of times they'll use a kind of like checkered floor thing to kind of create like a base for it.
That's a Frasurbane thing.
Yeah. A lot of like checkered floors and stuff. That just always comes back in different ways. The people yearn for a checkered floor.
Yeah, so actual surrealism painting, it's unlike that in that there usually is a horizon line.
Yeah.
Although there are paintings like Rene Magritte's This Is Not a Pipe, where it's just a pipe.
Yeah. But no, it feels like Salvador Dali stuff. Like it was always like, it was a landscape painting, but weird. It was a still life, but weird. Like it was using the like language of conventional art, but then doing something strange in it.
Yeah, Salvador Dali's paintings would 100% be Utopian Scholastic, if not for the fact that the giraffes are dripping and things are on fire.
Things are off, yeah. If he kept it just a little weird and not fully.
Yeah. Like he has this painting, it's called Ship with Butterfly Sails. I'm going to link that in the show notes. But if anyone wanted to take the time to redo that in a Utopian Scholastic style, it would fit so perfectly.
Yeah, butterflies I think are a big Utopian Scholastic like motif. Like a typical like monarch butterfly or what's it called? The blue one, blue morpho.
Yeah.
One of those too, yeah.
Well, they're the insect that people who hate insects are the most comfortable with. Like, say, Brianna, who doesn't like bugs. I'm sure
of the pod, not fan of the bugs, but yeah.
Like, I'm sure she doesn't think butterflies are gross or creepy.
No, yeah, they get a pass from everyone. Yeah, we want to protect them. We want to like plant plants for them and all that stuff.
Yeah. And then romanticism, that art movement, it's a little bit harder to convey how it's related, but romanticism, romantic painters, they were interested in depicting the sublime, things that were so great or awe-inspiring that they kind of couldn't fit within a painting, but they were trying to. And that's what was interesting about them. So they'd paint things like storms, fires, the vastness of the ocean. And I feel like Utopian Scholastic images are a bit like this, where they're trying to depict the internet and the digital age in the same way.
Yeah, these completely amorphous like things are just trying to convey the sum total of human knowledge.
Yeah, they're trying to convey like how many things you can look at online at once.
At one time.
Yeah.
One thing across a lot of these is, I mean, this is just broadly a theme throughout this period, but serifed fonts.
Yeah.
Specifically very skinny ones. Yeah. And to listeners, like serifs are the little like flat bits at the tops and bottoms of like an eye, you know. So Times New Roman, serif font, Arial, non-serif font.
Yeah. I prefer Arial and non-serif fonts, I think, but they are charming. They have this like earthiness or more like human quality to them when they have serifs.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think broadly, like, people use serifs to appeal to traditionalism, you know, and they use sans serif to say like, no, this is futuristic. We're like bounding forward. And this like totally breaks that because it's like, it's, you know, yearning for this future and for like all these endless possibilities. But it's also like tying into the past. I think it does ultimately work though, because I mean, you are juxtaposing King Tut with a space shuttle. Like you might as well, I don't know, pick a side and choose the serifed one.
It makes me think of the internet during the 90s as being more human in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of tech companies like started off with very serif fonts and they all shed them at certain points. You picture the old Google screen, like, you know, the different colors, like all the colors of the rainbow basically, and they have these nice serifed. I think it also had like a gradient on it to try and give it some depth too. And then the great flattening happened of all things. Yeah, they changed to a non-serif font in like 2015.
Yeah.
I remember the Apple used to have a serif font. And of course they changed it, and now they don't even put like an Apple store is just a symbol. You know, there's never the word Apple on it. But the Apple store at North and Clybourne had like a parking lot for the Apple store, and that kept the old logo on it for the longest. I noticed that it was this vestigial thing. Like I know Apple's very tight with their brand imaging, but I don't think they're going around to every parking lot and being like, you need to take that off. Like, yeah. It said Apple store parking in that.
Where was the parking lot?
It's not really like a lot. It's a parking structure basically that's shared between a few things, but it's like parking for Apple Store.
Yeah. Because right where the Apple Store is, there's the North and Clybourne Red Line station. Yeah. And they actually have this partnership with the city where they're responsible for the sort of plaza-esque, you know, the space outside of the station.
Yeah. I remember that getting off at that stop when I was pretty like, I think I was visiting Chicago. And I was like, this is city living here, a plaza. It's really atrocious. Like you're surrounded by cars on all sides and everyone's always double parking to go into the Apple store and all. It's not a great space, but they're trying. They put out chairs in the summer. Yeah. There's a little water feature. There's the elements of a plaza.
I think it's nice.
It's got a Starbucks too. I feel like the Starbucks Apple Store pairing is like the two juggernauts of the late 2000s, 2010s.
Yeah. And so the next section, we can talk about utopian scholastic media. So you've already kind of mentioned one of them being the cover of CD-ROMs or like digital products. But another one is children's nonfiction books, particularly DK Eyewitness. There are a lot of examples of this on the Pinterest board.
Yeah, these were a huge part of my childhood. I can always picture the DK logo like on the book. And then, Eyewitness was their range of just like informative books for kids. I remember hardcover, you know, like cracking those crisp things open, very shiny laminated pages.
Yeah. And they came out with so many, like in 1995, they came out with 20. And by the time that like they were sort of waning in popularity, they were almost running out of topics to do. Like they did that Star Wars crossover.
I loved those. Those were great in my mind. But yeah, they have this very clear visual style where it's always these stark white backgrounds and then everything really just like pops off of it. I don't know. It's also like the reason they were so fun to read is they were picture books, you know, with this sense of education to them. Yeah,
because prior to this, children's nonfiction, it had images, but they weren't emphasized and they weren't as successful in getting kids to read them. Like with this, they were cluttered in this way that made people want to read them more, basically.
Yeah. It felt like, I don't know, I guess you kind of end up reading them kind of left, right, top to bottom, but it felt like this like visual feast that you just like hop around and look at different stuff. I remember I'd skim it as a kid sometimes, or other times I'd like actually read it cover to cover. Yeah,
I would read some of them as a kid. I don't really recall which ones, but they were cool.
Yeah. I don't know, the Star Wars ones just stand out to me because they took this, what I read as a very like kind of serious tone as a kid. You know, like this is reading a museum. I think they would use that phrasing, like a kid's like visual library or something like that. And then giving that treatment to Star Wars made it seem like it was studying this like alternate world.
Yeah. And for people who don't know, those books, they would take literally every character from every scene and then assign them backstories that had nothing to do with the movies. Like they would take, okay, sorry, I'm going to sound like such a nerd, but do you know Quinlan Vos?
Huh?
Do you know Quinlan Vos?
No, I know a weird amount of Star Wars side characters. Like I can tell you about Ki-Adi-Mundi, but I can't tell you about
Okay. He's this like Jedi.
Nathan's turning visibly red. So there's this Jedi.
Okay, but there's this scene where Qui-Gon Jinn and Ben Kenobi, they're with little Anakin, and there's this background character who's just seated at a cafe in The Phantom Menace. And then I think probably in the DK Eyewitness books, they were like, okay, he's actually a spy Jedi. And yeah, he wasn't allowed to say to the other Jedi what he was doing, but he was there on a secret mission. And then now he's like this really built out character. And pretty much every character in Star Wars, you know, in the movies, again, it gets a background character and or like a background story. And yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I've bemoaned the whole like explaining to death of every side character and giving them all that, but it's just kind of cool. Like, especially when the Star Wars world was much more limited and there wasn't like 3 different like streaming shows on it. Like any morsel you got, people love to build it out.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, but back to DK Eyewitness. So they had a show with a really amazing intro. It's on the Pinterest board, but people should really go out of their way to watch that.
Yeah, if you watch any piece of media, it's this, because this feels like the one time that it like successfully jumped into like 3D. And the reason it didn't always jump into like 3D video is because it's incredibly hard to pull off this aesthetic in video form.
Yeah. And the reason it worked for the intro and for the series in general is because they would use 3D spaces, but they incorporated video of real life animals and real life things. But it was this sort of 2.5D that it was rendered where the video would pan around them, but they would remain kind of flat. So it kind of worked.
Yeah, it's so clever because it builds on the visual language they build in the books, which is that this is a like museum in a book. And so now this is a museum in a show. And so they have this camera flying through this, of course, stark white, like just in the, again, using the language of the books. And they had 3D objects in it, whatever was easiest to like, you know, have still in 3D. So there's like a sports car in there that they pan over. There is a dinosaur skeleton. But yeah, and then they overlay in all of these like beautiful like 2D videos of wildlife.
Yeah. I really like the parrot. The red macaw looks so beautiful.
Yeah, no, it's so
and
bright.
The intro for the bird episode, well, which it probably isn't plural. We'll get to that in a moment, but it's probably just bird.
Yeah, bird.
But yeah, the intro to that one, it's of an egg that then cracks open and like 50 parrots fly out.
It's so good.
Yeah. But yeah, so the series, it's set in that fictional eyewitness museum and that signature white space, it's conveyed throughout the series. But I watched an episode of it, and outside of the intro, it's more analog than you'd kind of expect.
Yeah.
You know, 3D animation and all this CGI, they could do it, but it was time consuming and expensive. Like there was an example I watched of how they morphed a beetle, like the insect, into a beetle car. And it's sort of what they would do in Animorphs, the morphing thing.
Yeah.
That took them 3 days.
Oh my God. It feels like they blew their budget on the intro video, which makes sense. You put that at the start of everything, you got to suck the viewer in. But yeah. So the actual episodes, they'd like cut together a lot of like footage they get their hands on, basically.
Yeah, because I think it was with the BBC, the British Broadcasting Channel, they would actually use stock footage from them. And so instead of like animating things that would be too expensive or time consuming, they just use stock image footage from BBC to convey them. So for the dinosaurs episode, for example, they talked at one point about how there used to be like large herds of dinosaurs. And instead of animating that, they just showed a herd of buffalo.
Yeah, it's like we're trusting the reader to kind of put two and two together. Here's a still 3D dinosaur. Here's a herd of buffalo. You do the rest.
Yeah. And that dinosaurs episode, they had... Well, every episode they have this. It's called The Hero. It's like one character that brings the viewer through the museum and sort of talks about the things they're exploring. But for that episode, it was a claymation T-Rex, and it just doesn't match. It was like bright green, and it felt like a different aesthetic.
Yeah. And then that's clever, like to keep kids attracted. Like kids, I don't think they do well with abstract knowledge. I think they need a character to follow and guide them throughout the episode. Dora the Explorer style. It's
better that than Bill Nye. I hate Bill Nye.
Oh, wow. I feel like opinion is turned against him. He was like overly like beloved in a kind of like 90s retro way. But
I just saw too many like Reddit threads where people talked about celebrities that are mean, and too many people talked about him.
I have heard that. That comes up.
But on the making of it, there's this really cool documentary, The Making of Eyewitness. It's about 30 minutes. It'll be linked in the show notes. But it has this like amazing tone and energy where it kind of feels like they were documenting people curing cancer or something.
Yeah, they really view their own work very highly. They really thought they were like pushing forward the like bounds of human knowledge.
They were like, we're the first people to ever document a tiger in a white studio.
That's what they're saying, like, the salmon shot, the way they pulled off the salmon shot. Like, we attempted to do this in the field, but no, we realized we had to bring the salmon into the studio.
Yeah. But really cool. Yeah, I mean, it is impressive though that they managed to bring all these animals into a studio in South London. Because I underappreciate how photographers and videographers get the shot. Because my dad's a photographer, and as a kid,
it was lame too.
He and my siblings, we would look at photographs, and like they'd always be like, "Wow, how did the photographer like do that?" And that would never cross my mind. But with this, I was like, "Wow, I'm glad I got to see how they made this."
No, it's a fun little video. For some reason, it's not on YouTube. It's on like Daily Motion or something. Yeah, I could just tell as it started. I'm like, wait, is the narrator for this Martin Sheen? It is Martin Sheen. He was like for all the episodes. Apparently, they got him. He's a very distinctive voice.
Yeah, and he's the one who said horse.
Yes. For the beloved episode of DK Eyewitness titled "Horse."
Yeah, because they don't have a consistent naming schema.
Yeah,
some episodes are like presidents and rocks and minerals, but then they have like horse and insect and cat. It's not consistent.
It feels like they made a weird choice and then they just dug their heels in. And like, that's how we do it here at DK Eyewitness.
Because I care about that kind of thing. That's why for the episodes, they're often plural. We messed up with the first one, flaneur. It should have been flaneurs, but first installment weirdness. It's okay. We made a mistake.
Yeah. I hope the listener can find it in their hearts to forgive us. Yeah, and then so CD-ROMs and computer games, great examples of this.
Yeah, the interactive encyclopedias, those are the best examples, but there's plenty of other things out there. But they were in general sort of educational during this time period. You know, the games like Math Blaster and the Oregon Trail, those were, a lot of them were produced by this company called The Learning Company, which I want to associate in my head with TLC, the Learning Channel. Yeah. They're not related, though. I looked it up.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Oh, where in the world is Carmen Sandiego?
Oh, yeah, that
strangely successful multimedia franchise there.
Yeah. But you know, that's kind of an example of, okay, so that is what I would sort of categorize as being a children's mail subscription, because I tried to look into this. I couldn't find a better term. But when I was a kid growing up in the 90s, my family, we would get sort of educational activities in the mail. I don't know if it was weekly or monthly, but there were these subscriptions where you'd get like sort of activities, almost say like a coloring book or something. But the only example I can really concretely remember is Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, which was a computer game. But I remember we would get these activities where it'd be like, okay, she's in a different country now. Here you learn about this country.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I wonder if this is related to the boom in homeschooling driven by fundamental Christianity at this time.
Yeah.
I think that there was like a need for more like, mail to you educational stuff.
I just think before the internet, it was easier to lure kids in to do something educational with the promise of like characters they loved. Like my family, we had these, it was either Animaniacs or it was Pinky and the Brain, but I was into that show. I liked it. But we had these like math Pinky and the Brain books, and I learned, how to do multiplication a year before all my peers did.
Whoa!
Just because I wanted to like do this activity because it had Pinky and the Brain on it.
Wow, that's interesting. I feel like my outside of school learning was driven a lot by, speaking of public libraries and stuff, like summer reading programs and stuff like that. I don't remember getting too much in the mail. I remember wanting to subscribe to Zoo Books. Oh yeah, that was the promise. They show how excited the kid is that like the Zoo Book has been delivered, and like, oh, what animal is it going to be?
That fits in with the zeitgeist, but not the aesthetic of a Utopian Scholastic.
No, yeah, the whole like kind of spray painty font and all that. It's just more like rad 90s than it is Utopian Scholastic.
Yeah.
Because it's just one subject matter. It's just animals,
Yeah.
It doesn't pass what I'm calling the space shuttle test. Could you stick a space shuttle on it, and would it make it Utopian Scholastic?
Yeah. It was cool though. But yeah, I think the fact that the covers, they would feature a single animal instead of multiple, that drifted away from the DK Eyewitness aesthetic.
Yeah. Very true.
Yeah. And then, people used to get free CDs, or children, all the time. Like they'd just be in like cereal boxes and stuff.
They were that weird small size though. A mini CD. I remember I got one in a Bionicle cylinder.
Yeah. I once got this like half one where it was like maybe the full length, but then
it was cut in half?
Yeah, it was like a square.
That can work.
It was called it was a Poke ROM. It had a Charmander on it, but it was the same thing of like, it had Charmander on it, and you do math questions, and then at the end, once you completed the math questions, they would let you like see a Pokemon.
Here's your reward. You can look
like
at
you'd
one.
be able to see pictures of it from the show or something.
Oh my! Wait, I just can't get over the fact that this is a Square CD-ROM.
Yeah, it was the only time I saw that, and I can't think of any other examples.
And this is a company whose like most famous symbol besides Pikachu is a circle. It's a Pokeball. Like it's just it's right there in front of them.
I think maybe just the technology for CDs got better, and they didn't need a full one for this product. They saved money that way or something.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. But one more example from my fever dream of like children's mail subscriptions. Yeah. Okay, Weird and Wild Creatures. This matches the ethos of Utopian Scholastic, but it happened a bit too late to really fit in. It was more 2000s. But this was like a children's trading card game, and you'd get a trading card, but then a larger, like, what are they called? Index card? It was like an index card sized, but the larger size of it. But anyway, you'd get that too along with it. But there'd be different animals, both real and fictional for mythology. And there was a card game you could theoretically play where the animals had stats. I never did that, but I got all of these for free because in the mail, I received this like, okay, you get like a year subscription for free. It was over 100 or 200 worth of their product, but I still have them. And yeah, this sort of fits in with that.
Yeah, they kind of remind me of the like 2000s gross out type. It's not like an established aesthetic. I'm kind of making this up. But yeah, I had like creepy crawlies. That was some kid toy thing. You'd make these like little, not edible. They were very clear about how they were not edible, but these very delicious looking like little jelly bugs things that you'd make. In a kind of like a not an Easy Kitchen. What's the
Easy Bake Oven?
Easy Bake Oven.
I had that too, actually.
Yeah, I think this Weird and Wild Creatures thing is kind of bizarre. I'm like clicking through them. I was wondering if they really firmly separate for kids between what's fake and what's real. Because I'm looking at the were tiger right now, and it's just right next to the sturgeon, which is just a regular fish. They really try and amp it up and make it look crazy. Which I guess if you do think about it, sturgeons are kind of wild. They do have like weird mustaches and a gaping maw. But yeah, okay, so this is, the were-tiger is a monster of the mind. Yeah. But a sturgeon is a strange wonder. I think that would be lost on a child. I think they're going to go their life thinking a sturgeon is some kind of crazy
I don't think I learned a single thing from that card game at all.
Yeah, it has chimeras, the boogeyman. They just have the boogeyman on here. But
yeah, the aesthetic of it, again, it isn't Utopian Scholastic, but the way I would sort of categorize it is it has like thick lines in this sort of DC Cartoon Network way. It has like it's darker in that sense.
Yeah. It reminds me of like Goosebumps books in a way, even though that's much older than this.
Yeah, but a little less neon.
Yeah. Oh, do you think I Spy books fit the bill?
They almost do.
Exactly. And that's what I'm thinking.
I think if someone includes them in a list of Utopian Scholastic examples, it's okay, but it doesn't quite fit.
They often have the like white background, the stark white background, so that feels like it's almost there.
Yeah.
But the pairings of stuff it's not that nonsensical. It's often like toys scattered. So it just makes more sense. I do like the photography though. It is these like beautiful still lifes of like building blocks and stuff.
Yeah, because the way it was composed wasn't the stock image collage. It was a photographer in a studio arranging all of these objects or things of a similar vibe or aesthetic. Yeah. And then, if he was doing that digitally, it probably would read more Utopian Scholastic.
Yeah, no, but this is a very analog thing.
And then, okay, so you mentioned Goosebumps. Scholastic book fairs. We should talk about them for a bit.
Oh yeah. No, what a blast. What a powerful like stranglehold one publishing company had on children.
I really liked going to Scholastic book fairs as a kid.
Oh yeah, they're the best. Like any like day off of class is gonna like, I feel like I can remember every field day, more than all the just like whatever days of school.
Yeah. One time as a kid, I told my mom I was sick when I wasn't sick, yeah. But I remembered that day was actually the day of a Scholastic book fair. And I asked my mom if she could take me to school, and she got extra mad because she already knew I wasn't sick. And then she was like, okay, you're not actually sick, and now you want to take you to school anyways. Like, I'm not doing that.
Oh, man. I can understand, like, as a kid, you're just like, why is my parents so mad that I've done this? I don't want to go to school. And, like, as you become an adult, you're like, yeah, that would piss me off. That would really, like, you just want to say to that kid, like, hey, there's bigger things at play here. Like, I'm trying to get my boss's good favor or something.
Yeah. But what would you get at Scholastic book fairs?
I hope I got books. I really let's favorably look back and say that I got some very brainy books to, expand my love of learning or something. But I remember getting a skeleton hand. It was this like plastic hand that with your hand, you'd squeeze it and then it would like kind of operate the tendons of a hand. Yeah. I love that thing. That was like a cherished toy of mine.
I definitely got some books. I remember getting at least one Arthur Spiderwick's book. Oh. But I can't remember too many other than that.
Wait, Spiderwick Chronicles?
Yeah, Spiderwick Chronicles, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I read all of them. They were pretty short, though.
They made a movie out of that. They really thought they could like ride the Harry Potter thing. They must have known they weren't working with enough world building wise.
But a competitor to Harry Potter that was more interesting, I think, even than the Spiderwick Chronicles, it was the Charlie Bone series. Have you ever heard of that?
Lightly. But I thought you were going to say they're much thicker books. But what was that kid? He was a crazy smart kid, and he lived in a world with fairies.
Oh, Artemis Fowl.
Yeah, they gave that. I feel like that had a few fits and starts of making it into a multimedia.
A much
franchise.
Worse movie though than the Spiderwick Chronicles.
Yeah,
I never saw it.
I have a clear memory of the Spiderwick Chronicles movie. A kid gets like attacked by a goblin or something, and they pour like isopropyl alcohol on his wound, and they pour too much of it. I'm like, this is terrifying. Like, why would you have this scene in here? That's like, to me, that's such like a relatable, painful thing. It's like that. That's more shocking to see than someone getting their hand cut off in Star Wars. It's like, I don't know what my hand getting cut off feels like, but I know what rubbing alcohol feels like.
Yeah, like being a kid and not knowing what to do and solving the problem the wrong way.
Yeah.
Oh, something I actually learned this week from the most recent Thought Topics episode. So Nick was talking about how in Chicago, there's this event. It's called Get Lit, the grown-up book fair. It's hosted by the American Writers Museum, and they do it once a month. But yeah, publishers, independent and otherwise, they come and sell books. And then just like a Scholastic book fair, there's people selling things that have nothing to do with reading.
But are more fun.
Like stickers.
Nice. That's good. Yeah. They're trying to capture the magic.
Yeah. Would you go to that?
Yeah. I always like milling around at a fair. I'm always good for that. I often don't buy a lot of things, but I just like to, look at things.
Yeah. As a librarian, I don't really feel the need to really buy books. The only ones I've been purchasing really have been both Banana Yoshimoto and Hito Sterl books. They both have books coming out in the next year or two that I pre-ordered, but that's about it.
That's good. From independent bookstores?
I had to find one in New Hampshire that happened to be the only one that you could pre-order both, and that's what I went with.
That's cool though. Yeah, that is a small bookstore. Yeah, no.
Yeah. And then something I wanted to briefly talk about. So one thing Evan Collins says on the Arena page that I think is an interesting idea is that he talks about how the aesthetic represents an end of history approach to learning. So I wanted to talk about you and theorize what that might be in reference to. Mm-hmm. So it's obviously in reference to Fukuyama's book, The End of History and the Last Man. Mm-hmm. And just for readers who aren't familiar, he talked in that about how, communism was defeated, neoliberalism, or just general democracy as he probably viewed it. That was just the default way things were going to be now, and countries were naturally arriving at it. And we don't have the sort of forces to cause world-changing events that we used to. History is going to be kind of like a dead thing now.
Yeah, a lower grade thing. Like everything's going to be relegated to like smaller scale conflicts. Like all you're going to get is like kind of Kosovo-esque wars.
Yeah.
I always think about the Falklands War in this aspect of like, Argentina's strongman like having a show of force against England and the whole world wondering like, oh my God, can two sovereign countries just go to war without everyone else getting involved? And the answer is yes, which people didn't really expect, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just showed like, it's very reasonable. I don't know. Some people clown on Francis Fukuyama for this because everyone's kind of retort to it is like, yeah, but then 9/11 happened. That's history. And then people also point to now, like with the rise of various authoritarian strongmen like across the world, this just shows that like, no, there is not this like end state of nation states where they all become like boring liberal democracies. Like, no, it's kind of like agriculture. How like we have evidence now that like civilizations will develop agriculture and then like dispense with it as it like doesn't fit their needs. Like these things phase in and out.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of experienced that malaise of being like nothing ever happens, it doesn't feel, but I was always aware that eventually things would change and things would hit the fan. Eventually with 2020, the last 5 years have been really crazy. But I remember telling someone around probably 2017, like, nothing really bad has happened in so long. I wonder if in the next few years something bad will happen.
Yeah, we're due for something. Yeah. I don't know. When I think about end of history, we were talking about Charlie Rose, the interviewer, in the Discord, and his like famously bad interview of Francis Fukuyama, where it's clear that he hasn't read the book and he's just kind of read the title, and so he's just interrogating him. He's like, "So the end of history, like what? Like history is ending?" And it's like, "Buddy, you got to do more than this. Like, come on."
It's probably like FKH Wigs this week. You definitely didn't see that, but
no, it didn't come across my desk.
No, there was this video where she was being interviewed by someone, and she just says like 3 times in a row, like, "Where are the thinkers?" And then the interviewer like, says something in response, and then she just says it out loud again because it's a rhetorical question.
Real. Love her.
Yeah. Okay, so Fukuyama might be wrong, probably was wrong, but Utopian Scholastic was probably representing this idea at the time that there was an end of history. And how is it doing that? And I think it's that it sort of depicts education or like world history or just entire academic disciplines as being something that you can consume in one product or interpret all at once,
Yeah, that it's like we wrapped it all up in Microsoft Encarta 95, and here you can purchase it for $20. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. Whenever I would get a history textbook in a class, I'd always just skip to the end, and I always wanted to see like what their last thing was. And just judging like from my age, it was always some kind of like early to mid 2000s thing of just like, well, the Cold War is over now, and like a lot of countries' economies are doing better. And I just remember one thing that always sticks in my mind is that like this one history textbook that said Russians are just like us, they like to play basketball. And it has just a photo of guys in St. Petersburg playing basketball.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, I wonder what the future has in store.
Yeah, I feel like people of older generations often don't explain things that happened in their lifetime to the generation below them. And that's often where the biggest gaps in people's understanding of history happen, is the stuff right before them.
Yeah.
And so then to sort of conclude, my theory about Utopian Scholastics end is that it never fully went away. It's just that the mediums that popularized it did. So like encyclopedias, reference books, those things stopped being useful. And but they kind of perpetuated the aesthetic, and they kind of still do it to this day in a way. I'm going to show this on air because I just switched positions this week, but the last like 5 months or so, I worked partially in the information center of the Chicago Public Library. They're the people who answer phone calls and answer questions submitted online. But it's a service that's been operating since the 90s. And we had this like sort of legacy collection of reference books, about a couple hundred, maybe 500 at most. The most recent ones I saw, they're from 2015, and they're a World Book Encyclopedia collection. And I'm going to put a link to a picture of them in the show notes. They are kind of Utopian Scholastic. They're of these flowers and bees, and they have that vibe, that sort of DK Eyewitness.
Yeah. Have a very blank white background and then a disembodied bee and a flower. Yeah, it's cool to see. It's like it's living on in this one aspect.
Yeah. And I looked through that whole collection looking for examples to see like, okay, how common was this aesthetic back in the day? And I didn't find many. It was mostly DK Eyewitness books. There were just a handful there. And it started to make me think, okay, was Utopian Scholastic not common? The truth is it wasn't common for adults. It was common for children.
Yeah, it feels like you need to trick kids into finding, like nonfiction interesting through graphic design. But adults are just looking for the most like respected institution that has published this, Encyclopedia Britannica, Oxford Encyclopedia.
Yeah, I feel like reference books, it's almost better if they don't have a picture on the front, because what one image could represent everything that's in this book,
It can't be done. You shouldn't even attempt it. Just put the name and the year on it.
Yeah. And then one more thing I encountered about Utopian Scholastic's end is that the Aesthetics Wiki, it says it ended in 2004, which is a very exact year for them to throw out, but it's because that's when Frutiger Arrow became popular.
Yeah, I don't know. This is where my skepticism of the Aesthetics Wiki goes in. I don't know if you can really pin it straight down to that. I do think that it lasted past 9/11. I don't think... that's always surprised me about some of the topics we've covered, that like Electroclash, despite taking place entirely in Manhattan, was not just like ended by 9/11. Like these forces just continue on. It didn't form a hard stop to everything. Yeah,
they keep going a bit longer. One of the best examples, which I was almost thinking might be a good image for the episode artwork, it's of this like Russian encyclopedia. It is a silhouette cover. It's the very first image on the Pinterest board. Yeah. But that one is from 2001. But it's one of the best examples.
Yeah, no, it's a really good one. I was very surprised at how it like I don't know. I mean, this is, yes, post fall of the wall and all that, but like it was broadly pretty universal thing. I think it definitely came from the US and was exported outwards. But then again, DK is a British company, and they had a role in that too. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It kind of shows that we had this increasingly like, connected and globalized world in the 2000s.
Any other thoughts about Utopian Scholastic?
I kind of want to watch the DK Eyewitness show, even though it is for babies. I just think it'd be fun. I don't know. I like sometimes I just want like 30 minutes of fun, lightly informative stuff. I think it comes from when I was a kid. I'd always watch Animal Planet in the morning, and I wouldn't watch it like any other time. Like it's just like eating cereal type television.
It is fun watching them and seeing what was cutting edge for the 90s, but the information, a lot of it isn't that accurate anymore.
Yeah,
like I was watching the dinosaurs one, and they talk about the K2 extinction event or mass extinction event, and they're like, oh, that might be how the dinosaurs went extinct.
Oh, wow. Interesting. 'Cause we have that pretty buttoned up now, right?
Yeah.
It's how it happened. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it took a while for scientists to believe that, because there was this time in science when they thought that catastrophism, like geological events or like geological features, were shaped by like massive events. Single like events, a hurricane ripped through the earth, and that's how like the Grand Canyon was formed. Like they really thought that might be the case, but then
gradualism,
it was like, I think it was called uniformitarianism. That was the opposite. But yeah, then they started to believe that. But then later scientists were like, okay, maybe the dinosaurs were wiped out by an asteroid. And people were anyway, it took them a while to believe it, because it was just like it went in the face of what they thought was the case.
It's just one cool exception to the broader, more consistent rule of uniformitarianism. Yeah. That's always something that throws me, is that we didn't like plate tectonics wasn't ironed out until the 50s. Like there was so much, like we were able to figure out the nuclear bomb before we could figure out that like, it really does look like that bit of South America fits nicely into Africa. Like it's right there. It's right there. You just put it together.
Well, I think we just needed more of a built-up environment, because that was kind of what helped people realize it. It was like after an earthquake, a fence would move a foot or two, and then they'd be like, oh, that's weird.
Really? I think that's the origin. I thought it was just more of like, like the slow march of study, that we just put together all these disparate things of like, oh, wow, like we have these species that cross these. But yeah. But yeah, it's surprising what takes a while. But yeah, this one was really fun. I got really excited thinking about Utopian Scholastic all week, because it's an underappreciated aesthetic. It's not something you can really dress in unless you happen to find like Utopian Scholastic clothing from museum shops in the 90s, but that's all for kids. It's not going to fit you. It's not going to be in your size. No. I don't know. This is like when we cover like futurist eras as well, like these very forward looking periods. I really find them fascinating. I like the optimism. I like to get a little taste of it. Yeah. Thank you for listening this week, everyone. I hope you have a good one. Yeah. See ya.
Bye.